Okay, friends, welcome back for another day of our chapter book read aloud. Of course, we are reading Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger by Lewis Sacker. We are now on chapter 14. Chapter 14 has a long title. So remember, in chapter 13, we met the new substitute teacher, who is Mrs. Drizzle, not to be confused with the country of Brazil. And we are trying to figure out if she has a mean streak or not. So let's see what happens in chapter 14. I'll show you the picture. All right. Chapter 14. A light bulb, a pencil, sharpener, a coffee pot, and a sack of potatoes. Galileo was a great scientist, said Mrs. Drizzle. He was born in Italy in 1564. And died in 1642. He was the first person to use a telescope to study the stars, and he also helped figure out the laws of gravity. Oh, I know about gravity, said Joe. Mrs. Jules pushed a computer out the window. It fell a lot faster than a pencil would. I don't think so, said Mrs. Drizzle. Galileo proved that all objects fall at the same speed. He conducted a very famous experiment. He dropped lots of different objects off the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is in Italy. It was built in... Todd raised his hand. You are getting a little boring now, he said. Oh my goodness, am I? Asked Mrs. Drizzle. Rondi, Leslie, Paul, and Calvin nodded their heads along with him. I'm sorry, said Mrs. Drizzle. She thought a moment. I know, she exclaimed. Let's do the experiment here. The children cheered. They loved experiments. Mrs. Drizzle rubbed her hands together. Let's see. We'll need a coffee pot, a pencil sharpener, a light bulb, and she thought for a moment. We need something heavy. An elephant is heavy, said Benjamin. Well, there are no elephants in Wayside School, said Mrs. Drizzle. Everyone laughed at that. How about a sack of potatoes? Asked Ron. I bet Miss Mush has one. Go ahead and see, said Mrs. Drizzle. There's a coffee pot down in the office, said Stephen. Go get it, said Mrs. Drizzle. If I had a screwdriver, I could get the pencil sharpener off the wall, said Eric Fry. I've got a screwdriver, said Jenny. Can we use a fluorescent light bulb? Asked Phoebe, and she looked up at the ceiling. I guess so, said Mrs. Drizzle. How do I get it? Asked Phoebe. You're the scientist, said Mrs. Drizzle. You figure out how to get the light bulb. Phoebe stood her chair on top of her desk and stood on them both. She still couldn't reach the ceiling. Hey, Benjamin, let me have your chair. So she put Benjamin's chair on top of hers, but she still wasn't tall enough. Calvin dumped the wastebasket on the floor. That's a trash can. Try this, he said. Phoebe turned the trash can upside down and put it on top of Benjamin's chair. Then she climbed on top, but she still couldn't quite reach. Leslie brought the class dictionary. Jenny and Dana donated their math books. Sherry grabbed Mrs. Drizzle's old blue notebook. Put that down, yelled Mrs. Drizzle. Right now. Sherry dropped the notebook. Mrs. Drizzle's kindly old face had suddenly turned mean. Don't ever touch that again, Mrs. Drizzle ordered. Sherry returned, trembling to her seat. Everyone was staring at Mrs. Drizzle. She smiled sweetly now. Go back to what you were doing, she said. Jason threw Bebe his lunchbox. She set it on top of the books, then climbed on top. Standing on her tippy toes, she was finally able to pull the cover off the fluorescent light. She grabbed the light just as the pile collapsed beneath her. She fell to the ground, triumphantly holding the unbroken light bulb above her head. Ron returned with the sack of potatoes from Miss Mush. Stephen returned with Mr. Kidswater's coffee pot, and Eric Fry unscrewed the pencil sharpener from the wall. Mrs. Drizzle wrote coffee pot, sack of potatoes, pencil sharpener, and light bulb on the blackboard. We're going to drop all 4 objects out the window at the same time, she said. How many people think the coffee pot will hit the ground first? Is there coffee in it? Asked John. It's about half full, Stephen reported. 8 kids thought the coffee pot would hit the ground first. 16 thought the sack of potatoes would hit the ground first. 3 thought the light bulb would be first, and only Terrence thought the pencil sharpener would hit the ground first. Jason, Jenny, Joe, John, and Joy were the judges. Mrs. Drizzle sent them outside. Stephen held the coffee pot out one window. Bebe held the light bulb out another window. Eric Fry held the pencil sharpener out another. And Ron held out the sack of potatoes. Everyone else crowded around to watch. With everyone on the same side of the classroom, the school leaned a little bit, just like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. On your mark, get set, let go, said Mrs. Drizzle. The objects fell through the air and smashed against the pavement. Let's pause. So remember, they used Mr. Kidswater, their principal's coffee pot, for the experiment. I wonder how he's going to feel when he figures out that his coffee pot has smashed on the ground. Oh my goodness. A short while later, the judges returned. Their clothes were splattered with coffee, and Jenny had bits of potato in her hair. Was the pencil sharpener first? Asked Terrence. It happened so fast, said Joe. They all hit at about the same time. But the coffee pot made the coolest explosion, said Jason. I think the light bulb hit the ground last, said John. Well, that's possible, said Mrs. Drizzle. Gravity causes all objects to fall at the same rate, but air slows them down. That's called air resistance, and that's good. Otherwise, raindrops would kill us when they fell. Air resistance slows all things down a little bit, but it has a greater effect on very light objects, such as a piece of paper or a light bulb. And of course, the shape of the paper is important too. A crumpled up piece of paper will fall faster than... You're getting boring again, said Mac. Mrs. Drizzle stopped talking. Now, we need a new pencil sharpener, said Leslie. Paul licked her ear. Do you remember what happens when Leslie says pencil? Yep, that's right. Remember Dr. Pickle? He made sure that every single time that Leslie said pickle, that Leslie said pickle, Paul would lick her. Crazy stuff. Tomorrow we will read chapter 15, which is called An Elephant in Wayside School. See you soon.